Okay then, so in this chapter we're going to build our very first real project, and it's going to throw everything together that we've learned so far and a couple of extra things as well. And it's going to be this little reaction timer right here, so not a huge project, just a small one to begin with, but it looks something like this. And if we click play, then it's going to wait a second or two until a green box appears. As soon as it appears, you have to click it as fast as you can, like that. And you can see my reaction time was snail pace. Hopefully yours will be better, but you can play again then. And this is a random amount of time. Okay, that was a bit better. Rapid reflexes. So this is what we're going to build. The first thing I want to do is give you a bird's eye view of this project in terms of components that we're going to use. So like I said, this is going to be a relatively simple project to begin with, and it's only going to contain 3 components in total. And the first one of those is the root component, app.vue, and then inside that we're going to nest 2 other components. First of all, the block.vue, and that's the block that flashes up onto the screen and that we have to click as quickly as we can. And then once we've done that, we show the results.vue component, which is where we show how long the user took to click on that and their rank as well. So like I said, really simple to begin with, but hopefully this practice of creating a project with multiple components will just reinforce everything that we've learned so far. Now, first of all, we'll create a brand new Vue project, so make sure you choose the directory you want to create this in your terminal, and then I'm going to say Vue, create, and then the project name, which is reaction-timer, like so. Press enter to create this project. Then we need to select down here, manually select features, and then using spacebar, we're going to keep these 2. We're going to take out the linter, and we're going to press enter to choose Vue 3, then enter again. We'll choose dedicated config file, and then no for this, and then it will create that project for you. Okay, so now that's done, let's cd into the new project directory, cd reaction-timer, and then press enter. And then I'm going to open up this folder in VS Code, so code, then dot, and then press enter to open it up. So this is our new project, and to begin with, I'm just going to clean up a few of the components. Inside the components folder, we don't need this hello world one, so let's get rid of that. Then inside app.vue, we don't need hello world right here, or the image, in fact, and we'll just replace this template with an H1, which says Ninja Reaction Timer, and then we can get rid of this import right here. Now I'm going to get rid of hello world inside this components property and just move this up here like so. And down here, we'll keep this the same for now. Let's just change the color of the text to 444, so a deep gray instead of that blue color. And then I think that will do for now. Let's just save this. And then I'm going to go into components and create those other 2 components that we need later on. So remember, the first one was block.vue, and this is the block that flashes up on the screen that we have to click. And then the other one was results.vue, and that's when we showed the results on the screen after they clicked the block. So that's pretty much all we need to do. What I am going to do is open up a terminal. Remember, you can go to terminal and new terminal to do this, or use this shortcut right here. And then I'm going to npm run serve to serve this in a browser so we can preview it so far. And if we control click this and bring this over, we can see it right here. So that is the project so far. And next, we'll start a new game by adding a little button right here. Alright then, so the first thing I want to do is allow the user to click on a button to start a new game. And when they click that button, I want 2 things to happen. First of all, I want to keep track of whether a user is currently playing a game or not. So maybe I'll create a boolean, a bit of data that is true or false, and it's true if they're currently playing and it's false if they're not, and then we can conditionally output different things dependent on that boolean. So that's the first thing. I want to keep track of when the user is playing after they click on that button, so it's going to go to true at that point. The second thing I want to do is start a timer for a random amount of time, maybe between 2 and 7 seconds or something like that. So each time we play the game, it's going to be a random amount of time, maybe 4.3 seconds the first time, 5.8 the second time, etc. Okay, so we're going to do those 2 things. Now the first thing I'm going to do is add on a button inside the app.vue file. So let me do that, button, and inside I'll just say play. Now when a user clicks on this, so we'll add a click event, we want to fire a function, and that function is going to be called start. So let's create our methods property down here, and inside that we need a function called start. Now inside here is where I want to do those two things. I want to keep track of whether a user is currently playing, and I also want to set some kind of delay, and that is the amount of time it's going to be before the block appears on the screen that we have to click. So before we actually do that inside the method, let me first create a couple of properties inside the data function. So data, remember, is a function which returns an object. Now inside this object we're going to have two properties. The first one is going to be is playing, and that's going to keep track of whether a user is playing or not. So it's going to be true or false. Now it's going to be false to begin with when we first load the page, and it's only going to become true when we click on this button, so we'll change it in here in a second. The second property is going to be the delay, and that is the amount of time that it's going to be before the block appears on the screen. So to begin with, it's going to be null, but we're going to set that to be a random amount inside this start method. So the first thing I'll do is say this dot is playing and set that equal to true, because when they click on the button, we're starting the game. The next thing I want to do is set the delay, and in fact I'll do that above is playing. So I'm going to say this dot delay is equal to something. Now I want this to be a random amount. Now what I'll do is say 2000, and this is in milliseconds, that would be 2 seconds. So we'll have a 2000 millisecond base time, and that's the smallest amount this delay is going to be. But then we're going to add another random amount onto it. And to do that, we take the math object that's available to us in JavaScript and use the random method. That gets us a random number between 0 and 1, for example, 0.64327, right? And then what we want to do is times that by 5,000, and that will basically get us a random amount of milliseconds between 0 and 5,000 milliseconds. So then we're adding that to this 2000. So then the most it could be is 7,000 milliseconds, and the least it could be is 2,000 milliseconds. So between 2 and 7 seconds, right? So we're now updating that delay over here with that amount, and each time we start a new game, it's going to be a different amount between 2 and 7 seconds. Okay, so they're the two things I wanted to do. Now what I'm going to do is just come down here and say console.log, and we'll just log out the delay. So this dot delay, like so. So if I come over here, I'm going to open up the console, and then I'm going to press play, and we should see a different number. So you see right here, this is milliseconds, so that would be 3.4 seconds. If I click again, it's a different number, 4.3 seconds, 6.3 seconds, etc. So every time they play a new game, we get a different amount of time that we're going to have to wait, so it's random. Okay then, so the next thing I want to do is flesh out this block that we're actually going to show on the screen. And this is going to be nested inside this app component right here. And we're going to pass in the delay. And so if we receive that as a prop inside this block component, then after that amount of time, we can eventually show the block. Now let's just start off by creating the template, the script, and the style. And there is a shortcut for that. In VS Code, I'm going to type in Vue and click on this top one right here. And that creates us the empty template, the script, and the style. Okay, so inside this, I'm going to do a div with a class of block, and this is just to style it later on. And inside, I'm just going to say, click me. All right. So now inside the style, I'll just style this up a little bit, and I'm going to paste these in so you don't have to watch me type it out. We're just targeting this div right here, giving it a width, a border radius of 20 pixels, a background color of this green, and then we also give it a color of white for the text inside it. We align that text to the center, give it a padding up and down of 100 pixels so it comes into the center vertically as well, the text, and then a bit of margin at the top and bottom as well. Alright, so that's pretty much all I want to do for now. In fact, we'll take in as a prop the delay as well. So remember, to take in props, we add on a props property, and then this is an array of the different props we want to receive, and the prop I want to receive is the delay. Now over in the app component, I can import it now. So I'll say import, and it's the block component that I want from, and it's // to say the current directory, then into the components folder, then I want block.view. Okay, and we need to add this right here inside our components property, inside our app component. So now we can use it inside the template. So let's do that. I'm going to say we want to nest the block right here. So if I save this, we should see the block over here. Now we only want to show this if we're currently playing. So if is playing right here is true, not to begin with when we first load the page. So let me add on a viv to this, viv, and set that equal to is playing. So only when this is true will it show now. And if I save it, we don't see it, but if I click on the button, then we do see it. Eventually, we're going to have that delay, so it only shows after 4 or 5 seconds or whatever the delay is. But for now, that's fine. Now, remember, I also have to pass in that delay as a prop where we receive it right here. So let me do this by saying delay is equal to a value. And remember, we want to bind some data to this because we want to pass in this property. And to do that, we can say v-bind : or the shortcut just : which is what I'm going to do, like so. And then say I want to pass in the delay property, which is right here. So remember, that will be a random number once we click on the start button. Let me get rid of this console log for now. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We're starting the game. When we click on this, we're creating a random amount of time and also setting is playing to true so that we show that block. And what I'd like to do next is work on the delay. But before I do that, I'm just going to add one more thing to this button, and that is the disabled property. So this is just an HTML attribute, a normal one without Vue, nothing to do with the Vue. And I'm going to bind data to this. So : disabled, and I want this button to be disabled when we're currently playing. So when is playing is true. So now the button will be disabled and we can't click it while this is true. So we can't start a new game while a game is currently going on. Hope that makes sense. Save it, and you can see while the game is going on, I can't click it again. If I refresh, we see it. As soon as I click it, it becomes disabled because is playing is true. All right, cool. So that's kind of the basic setup. We've started a new game, and next we need to work on that delay. And to do that, we're going to have to look at lifecycle hooks in Vue. So I want to introduce a new concept that we've not seen yet in Vue, and that is lifecycle hooks. So every Vue component that you create goes through a specific lifecycle in your application. It's created, it's mounted to the DOM, it's updated, maybe with different data at some point, and eventually when we don't need it anymore on the screen, it's destroyed. Now we can tap into these different parts of the lifecycle of Vue components, and we can run code at different points using what is known as lifecycle hooks. So I'm just on the Vue documentation right here, where it's got a really nice diagram of a Vue component lifecycle, and it shows all the different hooks that we can use. So to begin with, we can see we use the create app method to create our application, which is eventually mounted to the DOM. Now, these different red things right here, these are all the different lifecycle hooks, the different functions that we can use to fire code at different points during the component's lifecycle. So the first one that we have access to is the before create hook. And this fires before the component is even fully created, and it's at the very start of its initialization. Now, inside this hook, we can't access any data from the data object or any template elements yet. Then it moves on, and when it's created the components, we fire this created hook. And this is when the component has been created but not yet mounted to the DOM. Now, we can't access the data now, but we still can't access the template. And after this, it starts to compile our template right here. And then when it does that, it fires the before mount hook. Now, this is the point just before our component is mounted to the DOM. And in here, we can now access all of our data, events, and templates. Now, right after this hook, Vue mounts our component to the DOM, and then it fires this hook right here, the mounted function. Now, this is a popular place to make fetch requests if you need data for your component, but you can also make them in different hooks like the created and before mount hook too. Now, once the component is mounted, we know that data can change either over time or in reaction to user events like clicking buttons. Now, when that happens, when that data updates and changes, it's then that we fire the before update hook. Now, this happens after the data change, but before the updates are re-rendered to the DOM. Now, once they are rendered to the DOM, we fire the updated hook, and that's after all of the updates have been reflected in the browser. Now, finally, when the component is no longer needed on the screen in the browser, it's removed. It's at this point that we fire two final hooks, before unmount and unmounted, which we could use for any component cleanup. So that's the whole lifecycle right here. It's a very good diagram, which I would suggest looking at yourselves. So I'll leave the link to this page attached to this lecture. And now what we're going to do is have a little go of some of these different hooks inside our project. So what I'd like to do now is show you how to use these different lifecycle hooks in our components, and we'll just go through a few of them. So let me first of all go to the block component, and remember, that's the green block that appears on the screen only after we click the play button. Now, if we want to use a lifecycle hook inside this component, we place it directly inside the component object. So after the props, I'll come down here and just say mounted, for example. Now, if I wanted to run some code when the component has mounted the DOM, I'd place it inside this mounted hook right here. And this will fire only when this is mounted to the DOM, the component. So for example, I could say console.log, and I'll just say components mounted inside there. I'm going to save this and refresh the page and just clear the console. Now when I press play, this component will mount the DOM, and we should see this logged to the console, which we do. Cool. So let's try another one. I'm going to now use the updated hook. And remember, this fires when any data inside our component is updated. Now, we don't have any data that is going to update over time inside this component. We only have the delay that's passed into us, and it doesn't change after it's been passed in. So let's instead create some data for this component. And inside here, we need to return the object. And I'm going to create a property called show block, and I'm going to set that equal to false to begin with. Now, the reason I'm creating this is because I'm only going to show this if this is true. Because remember, when we click on this to start a new game, we don't want to show it right away. We want to wait for however long this delay is, and then we only want to change this to true to show the block after that delay is up. So that's why I'm doing this. So I'm only going to show this if we have a true value for show block. So by default, when you first load this page, it's going to be false, so it won't show. And then what we'll do is start a timer for this delay, and we'll change this to true. And we'll do two things in doing that. First of all, we're going to demonstrate this hook updated, because then that will fire when this changes. And secondly, when this is changed to true after the delay, this block will then show, and then in the future the user can click on it after it shows. Does that make sense? So to begin with, if we check this out, if we refresh and click play, then we don't show it now by default because this is false right here. So now let's start a timer inside the mounted hook, because that's when we want to start the timer, right? We want to start the timer for this delay inside mounted when this goes to the screen, this component. And then after that amount of time, we want to show this div right here. So let's start the timer inside mounted. So I'll say set timeout to start the timer. And inside here, we fire a function after a certain amount of time. Now that certain amount of time is the second argument, and it's going to be this dot delay. So the amount of time in milliseconds that we pass in. Now that could be like 4,000 milliseconds, which is 4 seconds. So this would fire after 4 seconds, or whatever the delay is. Now inside this function, what do we want to do? Well, after that 4 second or delay, whatever it is, we want to change this to true. So I'm going to say this dot show block is then equal to true. And also we'll log out the delay, console.log this.delay, just so we can see how long, oops, let's do that on a new line, how long we were waiting. So remember, from the start, we pass in this delay that we make right here as a prop. We take that in right here. Then when this whole component mounts, we say, okay, we'll start a timeout and fire some code after that amount of time in milliseconds. So after that amount of time, we set show block to be true, and therefore, after that amount of time, this should show on the screen. So let me save it, and I'm going to get rid of that and refresh, press play, and then this still fires. After some time, we should get the other function, which then shows this and also the delay. Okay? Now at this point, when this shows, this has been changed to true. So the data has changed. It's been updated. And at that point, this will fire. So let's see that. So console.log, and we'll say component updated like so. Save it and get rid of this, refresh, and let's play again. So when the green block shows, we should see component updated at the very same time. So let's try it out. We wait for a few seconds. Then it shows, and at that point we also see component updated. So if you want to perform any kind of code at that point to do something or other, you'd put it inside the updated hook. Cool. So now we've done a bit of this functionality and we've seen a couple of hooks. Let's also do one final hook, unmounted. And by the way, we will see other hooks in the future as well. I'm just showing you a handful now. And inside here we'll say console.log unmounted. So remember, this fires after this component has been unmounted from the DOM. So when we no longer see any of it anymore. Not when this doesn't show, but when this whole component doesn't show. So let's save it. And if we refresh, well, the component never actually unmounts at this point in time. Even when the block comes on, it never unmounts. But if I go to the code, and I'm just scooting this over here so we can see the console. If I go to app.vue and comment this out and save, we're going to see it over here because now this should be no longer in the DOM. It's taken out by Vue and we should see component unmounted. Save it and we can see unmounted right here. Awesome. So this function would also fire if we're using Vue routing in the future to go from page to page and we're showing different components for each page. If we navigate away from a page, then the component from that page will unmount and then this will fire there as well. So it's also good for when you're working with the Vue router. And we will work with the Vue router later on, so don't worry too much about that for now. But hopefully you've got at least a general idea of the life cycle of a Vue component now and these different methods or different hooks that we can use to fire code at different stages during that component lifecycle. And they are really useful as demonstrated right here when we use a set timeout to wait a certain amount of time before we change a property to show the block on the screen. So this is a really useful hook for us at the minute. Okay, so what I'm going to do is get rid of some unnecessary stuff right here, which we don't need anymore. I'm going to get rid of that as well. We don't need that. And I'm going to get rid of these two hooks because we don't really need them. I'm going to save it as that, and we'll move on in the next video to actually reacting to this block appearing on the screen. Okay, so now a user can start a new game by clicking that button. They wait a few seconds before the green square appears on the screen, and as soon as it does, we want the user to click it as soon as they see it. So ultimately, we want to measure their reaction time. But what is that? Well, that's the time between the square first appearing on the screen and them clicking the square. So we need to measure that. And to do that, we're going to be creating a timer using set interval. And that's going to count in milliseconds how long it takes for a user to click it from the square first appearing on the screen. So to do this, we'll need to create two different methods inside our block component. One to start a timer when the green square first appears on the screen, and one to stop the timer. So let's do our methods property, and inside here do two different methods, start timer, and also after that we need another one called stop timer, and we'll stop the timer when a user clicks on the green square. So we want to call this as soon as the green square appears on the screen, and that happens right here after the delay. So at this point I want to start the timer, and to do that I need to say this to reference the component, then the method name, start timer, like so. Now how are we going to create this timer? Well, first of all, I'm going to create two properties in our data. First, the timer itself, and we're going to set that to null to begin with, and then the reaction time, and this is going to track the amount of time it takes for the user to click on the square. So this right here, this is going to store a set interval. Now that set interval is going to run every 10 milliseconds, and every 10 milliseconds we're going to increase this by 10 milliseconds. So the timer is running in 10 millisecond steps. So let's create that. First of all, we'll say this dot timer is equal to set interval, like so. And the reason, by the way, that I'm storing it inside some kind of data is so that when we come to stop the timer later on, we can clear that interval that we store. All right. So this is going to run a function, and that function is going to run every 10 milliseconds. All right. So this is going to increase by 10 milliseconds a time. And every 10 milliseconds, what we want to do is take this dot reaction time and add 10 to it. So plus equals 10. That's all we're doing. So we're timing the reaction time in steps of 10 milliseconds. This is going to keep on increasing until we stop the timer. So then, when we do stop the timer, what we want to do is clear that interval. So we'll say clear interval, and we pass in this dot timer, this thing right here. And that's why we stored it, this dot timer. And when we clear the interval, this function is no longer going to fire. So reaction time is no longer going to increase. So that will be the end reaction timer. Now we want to call this when a user clicks on the green block. So let's do that up here. We'll say at click and set that equal to stop timer. So I hope all this makes sense. When the component first mounts, we wait for the delay time before the green block appears. Then when it does show, we start the timer, and that goes up in increments of 10 milliseconds, and we store that time in reaction time over here. We store the timer, the set interval, inside this variable. Then when a user clicks on the green square, maybe after 50 milliseconds or something like that, then we clear the interval, and so this will no longer keep going up, and it will just store their reaction time, what it was at the point of clicking. So we clear it, and we also should maybe log out their score to the console for now. Console.log, and we'll say this.reaction time. So let's try this out. I'm going to refresh over here, clear that and play, and wait for the green blob to appear. Click it, and we can see my reaction time was 360 milliseconds. Let me try that again just so you can see it's different. And now I get 480 milliseconds. All right. So now we're tracking their reaction time. The next thing we need to do is figure out how to tell the parent component over here that we have that reaction time, they've clicked it, and how to send that data, that reaction time, back up into the parent component, because we're going to work with it inside this component, and we'll see how to do that in the next lesson. Alright then, so everything's working so far. We can click on play to start a new game, wait a few seconds, the green block appears, it starts a timer, we click on the green block and then it stops the timer, and then we get our reaction time right here. But we want to do something with that reaction time. Ultimately, we want to show it to the user, and we're going to do that around about here, and it will be shown to the user eventually inside this results components. Now, that results component is going to be nested inside app.vue, the root component below the block. Now, if we're going to show the results in the results component, then we need that data, the reaction time that's stored inside the block component. So how do we get it from the block component back up into app.vue in order to pass it down into the results component? Well, we can do this by emitting a custom event from the block component. Remember, we've seen this in the past. We emit a custom event from a component by using the emit keyword. And we're going to do exactly the same thing here. So right when we stop the timer, this is after we've clicked the block. That's the moment I want to emit a custom event to this thing right here, so we can react to it inside the app.vue. And when we send a custom event or emit a custom event, we can send along with it some extra data. So I could send along with it the reaction time, and then we could access that from app.vue. And that's what we're going to do. So let's do it right here when we stop the timer. That's when we want to emit the event. So we'll say this dot $emit. We've seen this before. We give the event a name. I'm going to call it end because it's the end of the game once they've clicked on it. And you can call it what you want, by the way, that's not important. But the second argument is going to be any data we want to send along with this event. And that data is going to be this.reaction time. So their score that we have right here, the 380 milliseconds in my case. So let's now save that. And remember, we can react to this event being emitted inside the parent component on that component right here. And we do that by saying at and then the event name, which is end in our case, and setting it equal to some kind of function we want to run when this event occurs. So I'm going to call this function end game because that's what's happening, right? And we need to create this function now down here inside the methods. So end game like so. Now remember, we passed along this second argument, this data, and when we do that, we automatically get access to it as a parameter inside the function that we use to handle that event. So let's do that. I'm going to call this reaction time, but you can call it what you want. It doesn't have to be the same as this. We're just passing a value here, and it can be called whatever you want inside this function. So we have that inside this function, and what I want to do now is store that time or that score inside this component in a variable or in a property. So let's create one called score and set that as null to begin with, and then we'll update this right here. So we'll say this.score is equal to the reaction time. Okay, so that's all I want to do for now. In fact, I also want to say we're no longer playing the game. So I want to turn that back from true to false again because we've ended the game, and then that way they can start a new game if they wish. So let's say this dot is playing is back to false. Okay, so now we have that and we have the score stored right here. We could therefore output the score over here. So let's do that. We'll do a p tag for now. Eventually we are going to show them inside the results component, which will be nested here. But before we do that, let's just output them in this component. So paragraph tag, and we'll say reaction time, and that's going to be the score because we store it here, right here. Okay, so let's add milliseconds after that. So we're using those and save it. I'm going to come over here and we can see at the minute there's no number there, but when we play, once we click on the green blob when it appears, we can see now reaction time is 520 milliseconds. So we're taking that data from the block component, we're passing it up inside this custom event, and then we listen to that event right here. We call this function, which automatically takes that argument, and we're updating the score, which is equal to that time, and then we output the score over here. Now, when we first load the game like this, I don't want to show it. I only want to show it based on a certain condition. So let's now go over here and say we'll have another data property called show results. And there's more than one way of doing this. I just want to make it explicit. And I'm going to set that to be false. And then I'm going to say up here, viv, and set that equal to show results like so. So now only if this is true, will this show? Now, how do we set this to true when we want to show it? Well, we can do that at the end of a game. So I can say this.show results is now equal to true. So save that and then come over here and refresh. And now it doesn't show to begin with, but it should show at the end once we've clicked on this green square right here. The only thing is, if we start a new game now, then it still shows, and I want to hide it when we start a new game. So we'll say over here, this.show results is then equal to false again. Save it, and let's come over here, play the game, wait a second or two, click on that, we see the results. As soon as we start to play again, we don't see that time until we click on the green square again, and then we see it. So that is much better. Okay, so that's how we use custom events to send up data as an argument, which we can then receive in any kind of callback function we use. Alright then, so it's time for another challenge, and this time it's a relatively simple one. All I want you to do is, when the game ends, show the results component. So that's this thing over here. So you can show that underneath the block and only show it after the game ends, much like we only show the reaction time score after the game ends. So you can delete this and you can show the results instead. Then inside that results component, output the score. So that's all I want you to do. Now pause it right here, give it a go, and if you're struggling you can press play again, because now I'm going to show you my solution. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is delete this, and then I'm going to put in here the results component like so. Now remember, in order to do this we have to import it. So I'm going to duplicate this import and change block right here to results, and then we need to register it inside the component here, and then inside the results, remember I only want to show this if the game is finished, or at this point when this is true, show results. So I'll say v-if is equal to show results like so. Now inside the results component I need access to the score, so I'm going to pass that in as a prop, and I need to use some data binding in order to do this. So colon and then score is equal to score. And by the way, you don't have to call it score, you can call it whatever you want, but makes sense to me just to call it the same thing. So now we're passing that prop in, we can go into results and we can set this up. So again, you can just type out view and then click on this first one to get that boilerplate, and we need to accept that prop. So I'll say props, and it's going to be the score that we accept. And then all I want to do is inside the template output the reaction time, the score. So I'll say reaction time and set that to be the score and then milliseconds after it. Alright, so that's all there is to it. We created the results component right here. We said only show if results is true, or if show results is true. We passed through a prop, score, which is right here, and then inside here we output that score. Alright, so let's give this a whirl. Everything should pretty much work the same way as it did before, because we're not doing anything that different. All we're doing is organising our code a bit different. So let's press play, wait for the square to appear on the screen. Click it, and now we can see our reaction time. Everything works the same way, and if I click play again, that goes away until I click on the square again. Awesome. Alright then, so we're pretty much done with this project, but there's one more thing I want to do, and that is to give the user a rank based on their reaction time. So if they get a really good reaction time, which is maybe less than 250 milliseconds, then they might get a rank like Ninja Fingers, which is a good rank. If they get something which is between 400 and 600 or something like that, we can say maybe Rapid Reflexes. Anything else would be slow, right? So let's create that rank based on how quick they are, based on that reaction time, and then output it in the results component. So let us go to the results component, and inside here I'm going to do a data property first of all, and that is going to return the object we need, which will have a property rank, and it's going to be null to begin with. Now we need to also update that rank based on the score, and I'm going to do this inside the mounted hook. And remember, this fires as soon as the component is mounted to the DOM, and that's when we want to update the rank so we can show it. So I'm going to now check the score. So I'll say if, and then this dot score, which we have access to because of the prop, and if that is less than 250 milliseconds, then we'll give them a good rank. So I'll say this dot rank is equal to Ninja Fingers. All right. Now we'll do an else and say if this dot score is less than 400, then we'll say this dot rank is equal to Rapid Reflexes, and then we'll do an else clause at the end and say this dot rank is equal to Snail Pace. All right, so when this mounts to the DOM, we look at the score, and if it's really quick, if it's less than 250 milliseconds, they get a good rank, and we update that property. If it's not less than 250 milliseconds, but it is still less than 400, they get this rank, and if it was slower than 400 milliseconds, then they get this rank. Now we also want to output that up here, so let me do that. I'm going to say p and give this a class actually, equal to rank so I can style it, and we'll just output the rank like so. Okay, so now let me also just add a few styles at the bottom, which I'm going to paste in like so. So we're targeting the rank right here, and we say the font size is 1.4 ems to make it bigger, a color of that green, the same as the box, and font weight of bold. Now, while I'm styling, I also just want to add a few styles to the button on the home page, or rather inside the app component. And that's this button right here to start a new game. So let me also paste in a few styles for that. And the very simple styles, we're just saying that the button should have a green background, text white, no border, bit of padding, border radius to soften up the corners. The font size is 16, bit of letter spacing. Cursor is pointer, which is that little hand, and the margin is 10 pixels. And when it's disabled, we're going to give it a opacity of 0.2, so it's faded out, and the cursor is not allowed. So we'll see that in a second. All right, so let's give all of this a try. I'm going to play, and you can see I can't press it again, and that's the new style. When I click on this, if it appears, then you can see my reaction time is 380 milliseconds. It's not output the rank, which is right here. That's because I'm outputting a tank. I don't know what that is. So let me save this, and I'm going to refresh, press play, and try this again. Click on that, and you can see that was a snail pace. Okay, I want to do that again because I need to get a better time. Okay, rapid reflexes, that's a bit better, and I was on the cusp. If I got it 1 millisecond faster than that, then I would have been ninja fingers, but it wasn't to be. Anyway, that is our first project created.